The Perception Trap. Introduction. What if your consciousness is both your greatest liberator and your most cunning warden? What if the reality you experience isn't reality itself, but merely a reflection of the stories your mind tells itself? Welcome to an exploration of the most intricate and intimate prison you may ever encounter, your own mind. I'm thrilled you've decided to join me on this journey of self-discovery and awakening. Together, we'll challenge the illusions, question the narratives, and uncover the hidden forces shaping your perception. Have you ever wondered why two people can witness the same event yet walk away with entirely different experiences? Or why your perception of a situation can transform completely when you're afraid versus when you're confident? These questions point to one of the greatest mysteries of human existence, the subjective nature of our reality. The world as you know it, with its vibrant colors, meaningful relationships, structured societies, and personal triumphs and failures, exists in its particular form because your consciousness has shaped it so. Your mind is not merely a passive receiver of external information. It is an active creator, constantly filtering, interpreting, and constructing what you call reality. This audiobook proposes something both unsettling and liberating, that consciousness itself may function as a sophisticated trap, a self-imposed limitation constructed from beliefs, emotions, and patterns inherited across generations. These mental structures don't just influence how you see the world, they fundamentally determine what world is available for you to see. Consider for a moment how many of your daily perceptions go unquestioned. The judgment you make about a stranger based on their appearance, the immediate emotional reaction to a piece of news, the unconscious assumptions about what is possible or impossible in your life. Each of these represents a boundary of your consciousness, a wall in your perceptual prison. But if consciousness can trap us, it also contains the keys to our liberation. By examining the fabric of our thoughts and beliefs, the very structure of our awareness, we can begin to see beyond the confines of our mental matrix. Throughout our time together, I invite you to approach these ideas not just intellectually, but experientially. Notice your reactions as we progress. Pay attention to resistance, confusion, or sudden insights. These responses are valuable indicators of where your consciousness may be, both protecting and limiting you. The journey we're embarking on isn't merely philosophical, it's deeply personal. It's about questioning the foundation of how you experience existence itself. It's about recognizing that the bars of your perceptual prison might be entirely of your own making. As we proceed, I ask you to temporarily suspend what you believe to be true about yourself and reality, not to abandon your beliefs, but to hold them lightly enough that new possibilities can emerge. For it is only by recognizing the nature of our trap that we can begin to transcend it. Are you ready to examine the architecture of your own consciousness? To question whether what you perceive as reality might be nothing more than an elaborate construction of your mind? Let's begin our exploration of how consciousness both reveals and conceals the nature of reality itself. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Consciousness. When you say I am conscious or I am aware, what exactly do you mean? Most of us equate consciousness with a sense of being present, of experiencing the world around us. But what if this very sense of awareness is itself a construct, a sophisticated illusion created by the mind? This is what I call the mental matrix, a self-referential system where consciousness observes itself and mistakes this observation for objective reality. Like a hall of mirrors, each reflection seems to validate the existence of something real, when in fact, it's merely reflecting other reflections. Consider the nature of your thoughts. They appear in your awareness, seemingly from nowhere. One moment they don't exist, the next they do. You might believe you are the thinker of these thoughts, but is that truly the case? Or do thoughts simply arise, and then a secondary thought claims ownership of them, creating the illusion of a thinker? This illusion runs deeper than most of us realize. The very sense of being a separate self, a distinct individual moving through time and space, may be the most sophisticated trick consciousness plays on itself. The feeling of being someone, looking out at the world, creates a fundamental division between subject and object, observer and observed, that may not actually exist in reality itself. Cognitive dissonance, the uneasy sensation we get when we come across information that goes against our preconceived notions, is one of the most illuminating phenomena that reveals this deception. Why would conflicting knowledge produce emotional suffering if consciousness were genuinely an objective observer of reality? The solution is to realize that consciousness is watching its image of reality, not actuality, and that dangers to this model are perceived as dangers to the self. Consider how this plays out in everyday life. You believe yourself to be a kind person, but then snap angrily at someone you love. Rather than simply observing this behavior objectively, your mind works overtime to justify the action, to make it consistent with your self-image. They provoked me. I'm tired. Anyone would have reacted that way. This mental gymnastics reveals that consciousness is not witnessing reality, but actively maintaining a coherent narrative. Even more fascinating is the illusion of awakening. Many spiritual traditions speak of enlightenment, or seeing through the veil of illusion. Yet even the feeling of, "now I see clearly," can become another layer of the illusion. The mind that believes it has transcended its limitations may simply have created a more sophisticated trap for itself. The thought, "I am now awake," is still just a thought arising in consciousness. This recursive nature of awareness creates what philosophers call the homunculus problem. If consciousness is observing reality, then who or what is observing consciousness? And who is observing that? This infinite regression suggests that the traditional model of consciousness as an observer, separate from the observed, is fundamentally flawed. Modern neuroscience offers compelling evidence for this perspective. Research increasingly suggests that what we experience as consciousness may be a kind of after-the-fact narration. The brain makes decisions before we're consciously aware of them, and then consciousness creates a story about having made the decision. In experiments, researchers can often predict a person's choices seconds before the person becomes aware of having made the choice. This doesn't mean that consciousness isn't real or that it doesn't matter. Rather, it suggests that consciousness functions differently than we intuitively believe. Instead of a control center directing our lives, it may be more like a sophisticated virtual reality system, creating a simulation so convincing that we mistake it for a direct experience of reality. So what does this mean for you? It invites a profound question. Are your thoughts guiding you toward truth, or are they reinforcing illusions that keep you trapped in limited patterns of perception and behavior? The thoughts that seem most obviously true about yourself, others, and the world may be the very ones most worth questioning. When you believe, "this is just how I am," or "this is just how the world works," you are accepting the boundaries of your mental matrix. These thoughts aren't descriptions of reality. They're the architecture of your perceptual prison. True freedom begins not with changing your thinking, but with recognizing the nature of thought itself, with becoming aware of awareness, seeing that the seeming solidity of your conscious experience is more like a mirage that disappears when investigated directly. I invite you now to pause and notice. Who or what is aware of reading these words? Can you find the experiencer apart from the experience, or is there just experiencing happening, with the sense of a separate experiencer being another appearance within consciousness itself? Chapter 2. Emotional Chains. How Feelings Shape Reality. Emotions are not simply responses to reality. They are active filters that determine what aspects of reality you can perceive. Like colored lenses, each emotional state reveals certain features of your experience while concealing others. This emotional filtering happens so seamlessly and automatically that we rarely question whether what we're seeing is objective reality or a reality colored by our feelings. Consider fear. When you're afraid, your perception narrows dramatically. Your attention fixates on potential threats. Neutral objects and situations can appear menacing. Your body prepares for danger, and your mind searches for escape routes. In this state, is it possible to see the full spectrum of what's actually present? Or does fear create a tunnel vision that limits your perception to a narrow slice of reality? Now, consider love. When you're in love with someone, You notice their positive qualities, overlook flaws, and interpret ambiguous behaviors charitably. The world itself seems brighter, more meaningful. Are you seeing the person as they truly are, or are you seeing them through the warm glow of your own emotional projection? Neither perception, through fear or through love, is entirely accurate. Both are distortions. Yet we base life's most important decisions on these emotionally filtered perceptions, rarely questioning their validity. This emotional manipulation of reality becomes even more profound when we consider how past experiences shape current perceptions. Trauma, in particular, can fundamentally alter how you experience the present moment. A person who was attacked by a dog as a child doesn't just feel fear around dogs, they literally perceive dogs differently. Their nervous system registers threats before conscious awareness even forms. The brain doesn't neatly separate the past from the present. Neural pathways established during emotional experiences become templates through which current situations are understood. This is why someone who experienced betrayal in past relationships may perceive signs of potential betrayal in a completely faithful partner. Their perception isn't responding to present reality, but to emotional memory. Hope functions similarly, though in the positive direction. When you deeply hope for something, recovery from illness, success in a venture, reconciliation in a relationship, you become acutely attuned to signs confirming this hope, while often filtering out contradictory evidence. Hope, like fear, selectively constructs reality to match its expectations. This emotional filtering extends beyond individual objects or situations to color your entire worldview. A person experiencing depression doesn't just feel sad. They inhabit a different perceptual reality, where positive possibilities are literally invisible, where connections to others feel impossible, and where the future appears devoid of potential. This isn't a matter of negative thinking, it's a fundamental alteration of what reality is available to be perceived. The implications of this emotional shaping of reality are profound. It means that objectivity, seeing things as they really are, may be impossible for beings whose perception is inherently emotional. It suggests that emotional regulation isn't just about feeling better, it's about expanding what aspects of reality are available to be perceived. One of the most powerful examples of emotional reality shaping occurs in relationships. Consider how your perception of a romantic partner transforms before, during, and after a relationship. Before loving someone, you see them objectively, with both positive and negative qualities. When deeply in love, their flaws become endearing quirks or simply fade from view. After a painful breakup, the same person appears almost unrecognizable. How could you have missed their obvious flaws and red flags? In each phase, you would swear you're seeing the person clearly. But the dramatic shifts in perception reveal that you're not seeing them at all. You're seeing a projection shaped by your emotional state. The person hasn't changed nearly as much as your emotional filter has. This emotional distortion works both consciously and unconsciously. You may be aware of how anger affects your perception in the heat of an argument, but you're likely unaware of how subtle emotions like pride, envy, or insecurity might be shaping what you perceive as fact on a daily basis. Even physical sensations are subject to emotional interpretation. The same bodily sensation might be perceived as excitement or anxiety, depending on the emotional context. The same physical pain may feel unbearable when you're depressed, but manageable when you're emotionally balanced. So I ask you, are you seeing reality as it is, or as your emotions want you to see it? What aspects of your current perception might be distorted by fear, hope, anger, or attachment? What might become visible to you if you could temporarily suspend these emotional filters? The recognition that emotions shape reality isn't cause for despair about ever knowing the truth. Rather, it's an invitation to develop emotional awareness as a path to clearer perception. By noticing how different emotional states affect what you perceive as real, you gain the freedom to question these perceptions rather than being unconsciously governed by them. Chapter 3. Inherited Beliefs and the Ancestral Mind Trap. Long before you formed your first original thought, your consciousness was being shaped by forces spanning generations. The structure of your reality wasn't built from scratch. It was inherited, like an ancient house with rooms you've never entered and foundations you've never examined. We often think of beliefs as conclusions we've reached through experience or reasoning. But many of our most fundamental beliefs, about ourselves, others, and how the world works, were absorbed unconsciously during our earliest years or inherited through cultural transmission across generations. These inherited beliefs form invisible boundaries around what we can perceive as possible or real. Consider how your family's values shaped your perception of success and failure. If you were raised in a family that valued academic achievement above all else, you likely perceive educational setbacks as more significant and threatening than someone raised with different values. This isn't simply a matter of opinion. Your consciousness literally registers different elements of the situation as meaningful or irrelevant. These perceptual filters extend far beyond individual family dynamics to encompass cultural programming. The society you were born into carries collective assumptions about everything from gender roles to economic systems, from religious truth to the nature of time itself. These cultural assumptions aren't presented as beliefs to be evaluated. They're embedded in language, customs, and institutions as just how things are. A person raised in a highly individualistic Western culture perceives themselves and their achievements differently than someone raised in a collectivist Eastern culture. Neither perception is more correct. Both are inherited constructs that shape what aspects of reality become available to consciousness. Even more fascinating is the growing evidence for what might be called genetic memory or ancestral trauma. The way experiences of your biological ancestors may influence your own perceptual tendencies. Studies suggest that children and grandchildren of trauma survivors show physiological responses to stressors similar to those their ancestors experienced, even without knowing about these historical events. Consider how this might work. If your grandparents lived through war or famine, their bodies and minds adapted to survive extreme threat. These adaptations affected their nervous systems, potentially altering gene expression patterns that were then passed down. You might inherit not just their eye color, but their heightened startle response, their tendency to hoard resources, or their distrust of authority, all shaping how you perceive safety and danger in your environment. The concept of epigenetics, how environmental factors can influence how genes are expressed without changing the DNA sequence itself, provides a biological mechanism for how these perceptual tendencies might be transmitted across generations. Your consciousness may be partially structured by adaptations to conditions your ancestors faced centuries ago. This ancestral inheritance creates what I call the ancestral mind trap. Patterns of perception and response so deeply embedded that we mistake them for reality itself rather than recognizing them as adaptive strategies from another time and place. One clear example of this trap is seen in how families relate to money and security. A person whose ancestors survived economic collapse may inherit a perceptual framework where financial threat seems ever present, even amid objective abundance. They might perceive spending money as inherently dangerous or see investment opportunities only in terms of their risk rather than their potential. This isn't a rational conclusion, it's an inherited perceptual filter that determines what aspects of economic reality are even available to be considered. Similarly, beliefs about status, belonging, and social approval are often deeply ancestral. If your forebears lived in small communities where exile meant death, you may inherit a consciousness exquisitely attuned to signs of social rejection, perceiving criticism as existentially threatening rather than potentially useful information. These inherited beliefs become most dangerous when they remain unconscious. Like water to a fish, they form the environment so completely that we don't recognize them as specific viewpoints rather than universal truths. This is why examining these beliefs can feel threatening. They're not just ideas we hold, they're the structure of how we make sense of reality. The ancestral mind trap operates at both individual and collective levels. Entire societies can inherit perceptual frameworks that limit what solutions, possibilities, or futures seem available. Historical traumas like slavery, colonization, or genocide create collective consciousness patterns that persist for generations, influencing how descendants perceive themselves and others, and what change is possible. So I ask you, are you living your life or the life your ancestors envisioned for you? Are your perceptions of threat and opportunity, success and failure, meaning and purpose truly your own? Or are they unconscious inheritances that may have outlived their usefulness? Liberation from the ancestral mind trap doesn't require rejecting your heritage. Instead, it involves bringing conscious awareness to these inherited patterns, honoring their original protective purpose, while questioning whether they serve your reality now. It means recognizing that what your consciousness presents as just how things are may actually be just how things appeared to your ancestors. Chapter 4. The Collective Reality Trap. Your consciousness doesn't exist in isolation. It's embedded within larger fields of collective consciousness, social groups, cultures, and humanity itself that powerfully shape what you perceive as real. This collective dimension of consciousness creates perhaps the most subtle and pervasive reality trap of all, because it's reinforced not just by your own mind, but by the minds of those around you. When enough people share a belief, it gains a kind of solidity that makes it appear as an objective fact rather than a collective agreement. Consider money as a simple example. The value of currency exists only because collective consciousness agrees it exists. There's nothing inherently valuable about paper bills or digital numbers in an account, yet this collective belief is so powerful that it organizes much of human activity and seems as real as gravity or sunlight. This phenomenon extends far beyond obvious social constructs like money or laws. Collective consciousness shapes perceptions of beauty, morality, intelligence, success, and even time itself. What appears beautiful to you likely reflects collective aesthetic standards you have absorbed without questioning. What feels like moral truth may be largely cultural agreement rather than universal law. Mass perception, how large groups collectively interpret events or ideas, can override individual perception in powerful ways. Studies repeatedly show that people will doubt their own clear sensory experience when faced with a group that perceives differently. In classic conformity experiments, participants will claim a shorter line is longer or deny seeing obvious smoke in a room when others around them do so. This isn't simply peer pressure. The group's perception actually alters what individuals experience as real. In situations of mass hysteria or moral panic, where communities experience symptoms without a physical basis or sense threats that aren't objectively real, the ability of collective consciousness to change reality is even more evident. There have been instances throughout history of groups of individuals reporting the same strange symptoms, seeing the same apparitions, or becoming convinced of threats that turn out to be mainly fictitious. Collective reality traps are particularly potent because they reinforce one another. When you challenge a widely accepted belief, you encounter both internal opposition and external rejection. Try implying at a patriotic gathering that national borders are arbitrary human constructs, or at a funeral that death may not be a terrible thing. The negative reaction is a defense of communal reality itself, not merely a disagreement. This social reinforcement explains why breaking from popular opinions can feel deeply isolating. When you perceive reality differently from those around you, you experience not just intellectual disagreement, but a kind of existential loneliness, as if you inhabit a different world. This discomfort drives most people back toward consensus reality, even when their direct experience contradicts it. The internet and social media have added new dimensions to collective reality creation. Online echo chambers can generate shared realities so distinct from one another that different groups appear to inhabit literally different factual universes. Two people can witness the same event, yet perceive entirely different realities based on which collective interpretation they've absorbed. Even science and academia, which aim for objective knowledge, aren't immune to collective reality distortion. The history of science includes many periods where collective agreement among experts maintained theories that later proved fundamentally wrong. From geocentrism to medical practices like bloodletting, collective expert consensus has often prevented the perception of what later seemed obviously true. Perhaps most significantly, collective consciousness establishes the boundaries of what's considered possible. Throughout history, what one generation considered absolutely impossible, heavier than air flight, instant global communication, eradication of diseases, later generations experienced as obvious reality. The collective agreement that something cannot be done forms a perceptual barrier, as real as any physical limitation. Social change often requires individuals who can perceive beyond current collective reality constraints. Those we later call visionaries are often simply people who manage to step outside collective perceptual boundaries and see possibilities invisible to the majority. Their struggle isn't just to implement their ideas, but to make these possibilities perceivable to others. So I ask you, are your beliefs truly yours, or are they shaped by collective programming? Which aspects of your reality do you maintain primarily because everyone around you perceives them the same way? What might become visible to you if you temporarily suspended consensus reality? To even ask these questions requires a kind of perceptual courage, a willingness to risk the discomfort of perceiving differently from those around you. Yet this courage might be essential for both personal liberation and social evolution. While collective consciousness creates necessary shared realities that enable cooperation, unquestioned collective beliefs can also trap humanity in destructive patterns that no individual would choose. The invitation here isn't to reject collective reality entirely. That path leads to isolation or delusion. Rather, it's to develop the capacity to recognize collective beliefs as agreements rather than absolute truths, to hold them lightly enough that new possibilities can emerge, to understand that even your most solid-seeming perceptions might reflect not universal reality, but the particular collective consciousness fields you inhabit. Chapter 5. The Memory Illusion. Rewriting the Past. Your past exists nowhere except in your memory. Yet this memory, this internal record you rely on to know who you are and what's happened in your life, is far less stable and accurate than most people realize. Rather than a faithful recording of events, memory functions more like an improvisational storyteller, constantly rewriting history to align with your current beliefs, emotional needs, and sense of identity. This malleability of memory creates one of the most profound reality traps, the illusion that your past is fixed and knowable, when in fact it's being actively reconstructed each time you remember it. This isn't a flaw in an otherwise reliable system. It's how memory fundamentally works. The act of remembering is literally an act of recreation, with all the creative license that implies. Neuroscience has demonstrated that when you recall a memory, the neural pathway holding that memory becomes temporarily unstable, subject to modification before being reconsolidated. This means that each time you remember something, you're not accessing the original memory, but your last remembering of it, complete with any alterations made since. Like a game of telephone played with yourself, the message changes subtly with each retelling until it may bear little resemblance to the original event. Eyewitness testimony, which was long regarded as the gold standard of evidence, is now acknowledged to be extremely unreliable due to the reconstructive nature of memory. Confident, precise memories, even of traumatic or important events, can be partially or completely erroneous, as studies have repeatedly demonstrated. Events that never occurred might evoke strong memories in people if they are persuasively proposed or if they are relevant to their own story. The implications of memory's malleability extend far beyond courtroom reliability. Your entire sense of personal history, the narrative that defines who you think you are, is built on this shifting foundation. The story of your childhood, your relationships, your successes and failures isn't a fixed reality, but a constantly edited production shaped by your current needs and beliefs. Consider how your memories of a romantic relationship transform after it ends. While in love, you remember predominantly positive moments that confirm your feelings. After a painful breakup, the same relationship history reorganizes around red flags and problems you now see as obvious, but somehow missed earlier. Neither version is objectively accurate. Both are reconstructions serving your current emotional needs. This memory adaptability also applies to our shared history. Historical occurrences are continually reinterpreted in light of current issues and ideals. What is deemed heroic by one generation could be viewed as criminal by another. These are not simply divergent views on the same unchangeable facts. Rather, they reflect essentially distinct interpretations of what actually happened. The Mandela effect, which occurs when huge numbers of people share the same erroneous memory, is an intriguing illustration of the creative nature of memory. This phenomenon, which gets its name from the popular misconception that Nelson Mandela died in jail in the 1980s, he survived until 2013, shows how group reinforcement may make faulty memories seem like they are part of reality. Your memory actively creates details that were never experienced, rather than passively choosing which aspects to highlight or minimize. Your brain uses what seems likely based on prior knowledge and previous experiences to fill in the blanks when you recall an event. These made-up details blend in with the things that are truly remembered, giving the impression that the memory is accurate and comprehensive. Memory is also profoundly influenced by emotion. Events associated with strong feelings, whether positive or negative, are remembered differently than neutral experiences. Highly emotional memories often retain their emotional impact while paradoxically distorting factual details. The certainty you feel about emotionally significant memories, "I'll never forget that moment," offers no guarantee of their accuracy. Perhaps most unsettling is how your current beliefs reshape your memory of how you've always thought. After changing your perspective on an issue, you'll likely misremember your previous position as more similar to your current view than it actually was. This creates the illusion of consistency and the feeling that you've always essentially seen things as you do now, even when you've undergone significant change. The malleability of memory serves important psychological functions. It allows your narrative about yourself to maintain coherence despite life's contradictions and changes. It enables you to make meaning from random events by organizing them into patterns, and it lets you selectively emphasize elements of your past that support who you're becoming rather than remaining defined by history. Yet this same flexibility creates a profound trap when mistaken for objective truth. When you insist, "That's not what happened," or "I've always believed this," you're asserting certainty about a mental construction that has likely been revised numerous times since the original experience. Your conviction that you're remembering accurately provides no evidence that you are. So I ask you, can you trust your memories, or are they just stories your mind tells itself? What if your most emotionally charged memories, the betrayals you can't forgive, the failures you can't forget, the certainties that shape your identity, are at least partially creative reconstructions? How might your relationship to your past, and therefore your present, change if you held your memories as fluid interpretations rather than fixed facts? This recognition isn't an invitation to doubt everything you remember, but to hold your memory with appropriate humility, to recognize that the past is neither fixed nor objectively knowable, but continually recreated in service of your present needs and beliefs. In this recognition lies a certain freedom. If memory is inherently creative, perhaps you can consciously participate in constructing a personal history that serves your growth rather than limiting it. Chapter 6. The Self-Identity Trap. At the center of your conscious experience stands what may be the most powerful reality trap of all, your sense of self. This constellation of beliefs about who you are fundamentally shapes what aspects of reality you can perceive, what possibilities seem available to you, and how you interpret everything you experience. The self-identity trap operates through a simple but profound mechanism. Once you define yourself in certain ways, you become perceptually blind to evidence that contradicts this definition, while becoming hyper-aware of anything that confirms it. This selective perception creates the powerful illusion that your self-concept accurately reflects reality, when it may actually be creating the reality it claims to describe. Consider how powerfully labels shape perception. When you adopt an identity label, whether intelligent or anxious, leader or victim, spiritual person or practical realist, it functions as a perceptual filter, heightening awareness of experiences that confirm this identity while diminishing or reinterpreting contradictory evidence. If you identify as an anxious person, you'll readily notice and remember moments of worry while potentially overlooking the many calm hours that don't reinforce this self-concept. If you identify as bad with money, you'll emphasize financial missteps in your personal narrative while minimizing or forgetting prudent decisions. These aren't just stories you tell, they shape what aspects of your own experience are available to your conscious awareness. The trap deepens through what psychologists call confirmation bias, the tendency to seek and find evidence supporting existing beliefs while discounting contradictory information. Once you believe, "I am a failure," or "I am successful," you unconsciously search for evidence confirming this belief and interpret ambiguous situations in ways that reinforce your core identity. These self-definitions create self-fulfilling prophecies. A person who identifies as socially awkward approaches interactions with anxiety that creates the very awkwardness they fear. Someone who sees themselves as not a math person avoids numerical challenges, ensuring they never develop the skills that might contradict this identity. The reality you experience increasingly reflects the self you believe yourself to be. Personal narratives, the stories you tell about your life, compound this trap. Human consciousness naturally organizes random events into coherent stories with causes, effects, and meaning. But these narratives, once formed, begin to constrain your perception of what's happening and what's possible. If your personal story is, "Life has always been hard for me," you'll perceive and remember hardships while potentially missing opportunities and support. Some of the most limiting self-definitions are imposed during childhood and adolescence. Labels applied by parents, teachers, or peers, the responsible one, the creative one, the troublemaker, can structure consciousness in ways that persist for decades. Even when seemingly positive, these externally imposed identities limit the fullness of what you might become by making certain ways of being feel not like me. Cultural and social identities add further layers to this trap. Identities based on nationality, religion, political affiliation, gender, or generation all shape perception in powerful ways. These collective identities can provide meaning and belonging, but also create perceptual boundaries that limit what members of these groups can see or consider. One particularly restrictive form of self-definition occurs through identification with personal history. When you believe, "I am what has happened to me," whether traumas or accomplishments, you bind your present perception to past events. This keeps consciousness oriented toward history rather than present possibilities, limiting your capacity to perceive and respond to what's actually emerging now. Even identifying with positive traits or accomplishments creates subtle traps. The executive who builds identity around professional success becomes perceptually vulnerable to career setbacks. The parent whose self-concept centers on their children's well-being becomes blind to their own needs. Any identity, however seemingly desirable, constricts what aspects of reality consciousness can register. Perhaps the most fundamental identity trap lies in mistaking yourself for your thoughts and emotions, believing "I am angry" rather than "I notice anger arising," or "I am a negative thinker" rather than "I notice negative thoughts occurring." This identification with mental content makes consciousness a prisoner of its own fluctuations, rather than the spacious awareness in which all experiences arise. Some spiritual traditions suggest that the ultimate identity trap is the very notion of being a separate self, a distinct entity moving through time and space. This sense of separation, they propose, is itself a construction of consciousness rather than a fundamental reality. Experiences of no self or unity consciousness, whether through meditation, mystical experience, or psychedelics, suggest that the boundaries between self and world may be more permeable than ordinary perception suggests. So I ask you, are you more than the roles you play and the stories you tell about yourself? What aspects of reality might become visible to you if you temporarily suspended your usual self-definitions? How might your experience transform if you related to identities as useful tools rather than fundamental truths? The invitation isn't to abandon identity entirely. Practical functioning in society requires some stable sense of self. Rather, it's to hold identities lightly, to recognize them as convenient fictions rather than fundamental realities. Understand that the labels, roles, and stories you use to define yourself are perceptual lenses that both reveal and conceal aspects of what's real. Freedom from the self-identity trap doesn't mean having no characteristics or preferences. It means recognizing that these qualities exist as patterns within consciousness rather than defining who you fundamentally are. It means relating to self-definitions as useful but temporary constructs rather than absolute truths, fluid tools for navigating reality rather than rigid boundaries that confine perception. Chapter 7. Escaping the Consciousness Trap. Liberating consciousness is about seeing beyond the mind's inherent constraints. After examining how consciousness traps perception, we reach a profound and crucial question. How do we liberate ourselves? If our awareness itself is structured in ways that inherently limit our perception, how can we use this same awareness to go beyond its own boundaries? This question presents a paradox that is both challenging and hopeful. The very consciousness that builds perceptual prisons also holds the potential to recognize and break free from them. Think of consciousness as a hand that can grasp anything except itself. It can perceive, analyze, and reflect on external phenomena with remarkable clarity, but when it tries to grasp its own essence, it falters. Consciousness cannot directly see its own nature because it is both the observer and the observed. Yet within consciousness lies a unique ability, the capacity to notice its own patterns and limitations. This self-awareness is the gateway to liberation. The first and perhaps most essential key to freeing ourselves lies in mindfulness, the practice of observing our own consciousness in action. Mindfulness is not merely being aware of our surroundings or our feelings. It's the deliberate practice of witnessing thoughts, emotions, and perceptions without immediately identifying with them. This practice creates a crucial gap between pure awareness and its content. In this space, we can begin to recognize how our minds construct reality rather than merely existing within these constructed illusions. Imagine watching your own mind from a slight distance. A thought arises, "I am not good enough." Instead of automatically accepting this thought as truth, mindfulness encourages us to observe it as a mental event, something that appears, lingers, and fades. This thought is not an objective fact, but a narrative created by the mind, possibly based on past experiences or cultural conditioning. In this awareness, we realize that we have a choice: to engage with the thought, to question it, or to let it pass without attachment. Mindful observation uncovers the mechanics of our personal reality trap. We may notice how quickly fear narrows our perception, making possibilities seem fewer and threats more immediate. We might see how strongly our beliefs filter incoming information, allowing only what aligns with our expectations to pass through. We may also observe how automatically our minds seek evidence that confirms existing views, reinforcing preconceived ideas. These observations do not immediately break these patterns, but they make the mechanisms visible rather than invisible, a crucial first step. When we become aware of how our thoughts shape our reality, we no longer live passively within the constructs of our minds. Instead, we actively observe how our inner world influences our perception of the outer world. Another powerful tool for liberation is questioning our beliefs. Beliefs are not merely passive ideas. They are frameworks that shape how we interpret experiences and make decisions. A simple yet profound inquiry, "Is this true?" can begin to loosen rigid thought structures that may have shaped our perception for years or even decades. When applied to fundamental beliefs about ourselves, like "I am broken," "I am not enough," or "I need certain conditions to be happy," this questioning can create openings where fixed identities once stood, allowing for a more fluid and adaptive sense of self. Often, the most entrenched beliefs are those that seem so obvious that we never think to question them. Statements like, "This is just how reality works," often represent the deepest structures of our perceptual prison. Bringing gentle curiosity to these foundational assumptions can reveal their constructed nature. Sometimes the simple act of asking, "What if the opposite were true?" can break the spell of certainty and open the door to new perspectives. Breaking free from inherited patterns requires a willingness to examine cultural and familial programming. This does not mean rejecting our heritage, but discerning which elements of it still serve our current reality and which may be outdated protective mechanisms. It helps to ask, would I choose this belief if I hadn't been born into it? Or, does this value still serve the life I am living now? These questions help us separate useful tradition from limiting inheritance. For instance, we may continue to repress our emotions, even when expressing them would be therapeutic if we were raised to believe that displaying emotion is a sign of weakness. We can select a new belief that fits with our present need for connection and authenticity by acknowledging that this idea might have fulfilled a survival purpose in a previous setting, such as a strict family structure. Emotions themselves can distort perception, especially when they become habitual responses to familiar triggers. Developing emotional literacy, the ability to recognize and name our feelings without being entirely consumed by them, is essential. Practices like naming emotions as they arise, feeling bodily sensations without reacting impulsively, or choosing responses consciously help create freedom from emotional distortion. Imagine feeling anger during a disagreement. Instead of reacting immediately, we pause and label the emotion. This is anger. By acknowledging it without judgment, we gain enough distance to choose a conscious response rather than an impulsive one. This small but significant practice breaks the automatic cycle of reaction and opens the space for thoughtful engagement. Perhaps the most profound opportunity for liberation lies in reframing our identity. Instead of saying, "I am an anxious person," we can shift to, "I notice anxiety arising." This subtle change moves our identity from being fused with emotions to simply observing them. Rather than seeing feelings as permanent parts of who we are, we start to perceive them as passing states that do not define our essence. By shifting from rigid identity statements to noticing patterns, we create space for growth and transformation. This approach fosters resilience and adaptability, allowing us to respond creatively to life's challenges. Liberation from the traps of consciousness is not an all-or-nothing process. It is a gradual unfolding, a continuous practice of awareness, questioning, and realignment. As we develop mindfulness, challenge entrenched beliefs, and create space between awareness and reaction, we reclaim our freedom to shape our own reality. Reality is not just what we see, it's how our consciousness interprets it. By consciously observing and challenging the mental constructs that limit our perception, we become both the architects and explorers of our own existence. The journey towards liberation begins with the simple yet profound act of noticing. Awareness itself is the key to breaking free. Embrace the paradox. The very consciousness that traps us can also set us free. Final thoughts. Reality is yours to shape. Reality is not just what you see, it's how your consciousness interprets every moment, every interaction, and every thought. What if I told you that the life you're living right now is just one version among countless possibilities? That your beliefs, your perceptions, and your inner dialogue are crafting a story you might not have consciously chosen. Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow with a new lens through which to see the world. What would change if you believed in your potential rather than your limitations? What if you questioned the stories your mind tells you instead of blindly accepting them? What if reality isn't fixed but fluid, shaped by how you think, what you believe, and how willing you are to challenge your own assumptions? The truth is, you have more power than you think. You are not trapped by your past or by the narratives that society imposes. You can break free from inherited patterns, collective illusions, and the chains of automatic thinking. Awakening to your true self doesn't mean rejecting your past. It means seeing it clearly, understanding how it shaped you, and choosing a new way forward. To be truly free, you must dare to go beyond the familiar stories your mind repeats. You must investigate your thoughts, question your deeply held beliefs, and embrace the discomfort of breaking old patterns. It's a journey, one that requires courage and curiosity, but the reward is unparalleled. A life consciously crafted by you, not dictated by your unconscious conditioning. The world is full of those who have awakened to their own potential, who have broken free from the collective matrix to live authentically and boldly. You can be one of them. You can choose awareness over habit, intention over reaction, and truth over illusion. So are you willing to look deeper, to question everything you've been taught to believe, to challenge the reality you've always known and shape it from the inside out? If so, your journey doesn't end here. It's just beginning. If this audiobook stirred something within you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with those who are also searching for meaning and truth. Hit the like button, subscribe for more thought-provoking explorations, and join a community of seekers who are not content with merely existing, but are determined to live consciously. Stay curious, stay questioning, and remember, reality is yours to shape.